everyone, welcome back to Putting on the Mind of Christ, the inner work of Christian spirituality. You are loved with an everlasting love. This is your Pastor Yeti. Welcome to this very in-depth study, where we all well know that this is a lifelong process where we develop a higher understanding, a deeper understanding of the consciousness. Today, I'm going to talk about the prelude to the dark night, the breakthrough to the causal level. To help the listener to understand some of the higher and more difficult parts of the Christian path to higher consciousness, it's always good to hear stories from other people to help you to walk on that path. And I will give you the story, some experiences from the author. So here we go. I describe my personal struggle as a Christian to reconcile my denomination's insistence that same sexual expression is sinful with the inner promptings of my higher self to exercise my sexuality. I review my decision to obey this inner guidance and the consequent reopening of my emotional and psychic centers. Further, I recount many of the spiritual visions, voices, revelations, and other phenomena I encountered at this level and my breakthrough into the causal level. So here we go in the story. My consciousness popped up into the subtle level during the spiritual experience I had on the green at Yale University in 1970. I experienced this transformation as a significant and freeing spiritual experience. To use the words of John of the Cross, I felt as though liberated from cramped prison cell. This experience marked the definitive end of the dark night of the senses. After that day, I lived at the subtle level for about 7 years. I did not call it the subtle level, or call it anything for that matter. I find myself to be an integrated, happy, and productive person. During those 7 years, I was basically content with life. I attended law school, got my law degree, and began an exciting career in public service. I got several promotions, bought a home, and formed many wonderful friendships. My work was creative, well paid, and meaningful because I was able to be of service to a great many people. If anything, I was a workaholic in my efforts to serve others and maximize my career. I had this continued regular church attendance as well as any formal practice of meditation. Like most Christians, I'd never been taught any scientific meditation method, even though I'd been in seminary for 7 years. But I had become a natural meditator, one focused more within than without. Since myself was identified with the inner witness, I kept an observant eye on my thoughts and feelings and constantly tried to break through whatever I felt were inner constrictions into greater freedom. The breakthrough from the inner cramped prison cell into the subtle level had been so liberating that I worked hard to keep freeing myself from all fears and limitations. In the meantime, I was so engaged in my life's new work that I'd pretty well forgotten the various psychic and perhaps a few subtle experiences that I'd had before and during the dark night of the senses. I was closed down physically. All my focus went into my intellectual demanding career. I had also closed down emotionally after the totally frustration love affair I described and a similar law school friendship that proved just as hopeless. I didn't want to go through pain like that again, and I still believed, as I had been taught, that same-sex sexual expressions was morally wrong. I also feared, realistically, for those times that any such expression would ruin my image. My relationships with friends and with my devout family and sabotage my rapidly unfolding political career and ability to be of service to others. But shortly into my new career, I began to be moved from within to begin exercising my sexuality. For all the reasons given above, I resisted mightily and successfully and concentrated on my work. I kept up this resistance for 3 years. God's grace, the Holy Spirit, then intervened strongly and directly. I was given the realization that all love, including same-sex love, necessarily comes from the God who is love. 1 John 4:8. I was also given the realization that the only way for me to experimentally come into my true self, which I understood to be the same as my Christ self, was to accept my sexuality. Those church authorities who would prevent me from coming into my true self, like Simon Peter when he tried to steer Jesus from his mission, were for me occasions of sin. Matthew 16:22-23. An occasion of sin is a Christian term that most Christian readers will understand. Christians would consider visiting a bordello, for example, as putting oneself in an occasion of sin, a place where the person has a good chance of succumbing to temptation. Here, I am saying that even listening to these teachers would have been for me an occasion of sin, because it would have seriously tempted me not to follow my inner guidance. Finally, I was given to realize that to achieve my long-held goal of experiential union with God, the God of love, I had to let go of my fear that exercising my sexuality would somehow offend God. This is because I knew from the scriptures that fear, not hate, as many supposes, is the true opposite of love. 1 John 4:18. If I wanted to follow Jesus into love, then therefore I felt I had no choice but to let the fear go. So I get out to conquer them, putting my trust not in visible and human church authorities and their rational constructed theology, but in the unseen God who directs from within us the process of life itself. As soon as I began exercising my sexuality, I immediately opened up again, both emotionally and physically. Though, for me, a little sexual experience went a wrong way. The more I exercised my sexuality, the more open I became. I began to see and feel the incoming subtle and causal energies. I found myself more moved to renew my formerly intense quest for union with God. Once again, I found myself passionately interested in spirituality, psychology, and religion, and started attending church again regularly. An argument can be made that, from the point of view of spirituality, it is sexuality, not marriage, that is the true sacrament, or effective signs of God's union with us, and of ours with each other. According to some biblical scholars, Jesus appears to have made precisely this point. Matthew 19 verse 12. The exercise of sexuality always has a powerful spiritual, inner, psychological effect. It is precisely because sexuality is so spiritually powerful that, however playful the encounter, it is best exercised with reverence and awareness, to the otherwise risks getting badly burned. Marriage, on the other hand, though it usually contains sexual union as its psycho-spiritual core, has no inner psychological effect per se. In many cultures, including medieval Christendom, children have been married to distant spouses they have never even met. Marriage is primarily a legal, contractual matter having to do with such material things as property, rights, inheritance, legal responsibilities for child rearing, taxation, and immigration rights. The role of the Christian Church as the defender of the traditional family is largely a cultural phenomenon, perhaps originating after the tribal conquest of Europe, when the Church took upon itself the task of bringing the tribal peoples from the level of magical consciousness upward into the mythic, and later the rationalized mythic. In my case, due in no small measures to the reopening of my heart, energized by sexual experience, my inner spiritual experiences immediately grew in intensity. For a year or two, whenever the name of Jesus came up in a hymn at church, I was so profoundly moved that I found myself unable to continue singing. Instead, lapsing into a silence filled with intense longings and yearnings for Jesus, my beloved. This was an example of subtle level affectivity. Another time, hearing the gospel in which Jesus promises living water to the Samaritan woman, I was overwhelmed by the sensation of myself being inundated with these living waters. Still another time, I looked about in church and, instead of seeing other people, I saw each person as a burning bush of the type Moses saw on the mountain. I realized I was seeing the fearing light of Christ, of God, within the core reality of each person. This was an example of subtle level seeing. I started noticing the powerful numinous figures in my dreams and began faithfully to follow their instructions. Thinking of what Jesus had said to the rich young man, I once again applied for the ministry, resolving once more to leave all for God. But later I had a dream in which, while I was at a church service, the Christ child appeared next to me in the pew and said, "Don't you find this terrible boring? I'd rather go swimming." I knew enough psychology to understand that water represents the subconscious and that swimming would mean exploring the subconscious layers of the psyche. The message was that, for me at least, Jesus did not care about external ministries and observance, the forever crying out of "Lord, Lord," but cared very much that I do God's will by going deeper within my psyche. Matthew 7:21. I withdrew my ministry applications the next day. Later I found out the official in charge of admission had judged me morally unsuitable anyway because of the sexual activity. I began to keep a journal and often found myself writing all night, many times moved to rapturous love for God, and just as often dissolved in tears. I wrote for about 15 minutes one time, but when I came to and looked at the clock, 10 hours had passed. An example of subtle level rapture. Many times I was listening to music for hours at a time, but when I came to, I found that neither the radio nor stereo had been playing. The music, unusually a wondrous mixture of every sound from rock music to Beethoven, had been coming from within. This was an example of subtle level hearing. Another time I went to a church service at which a great many church leaders were present, thinking of what Jesus had said about the mother hen and her chickens, and realizing how much these high officials of the New Jerusalem resembled the high officials of the Old. I started to cry. I continued to cry uncontrollably throughout the service. There were negative experiences as well, magnetized into my life by the actions of the incoming light in stirring up my buried dark side. One time, I got involved with a person who seemed nice. It turned out that person operates a ring of prostitution. A crazy person followed me into my house one day, scooped up all the change I'd been saving in a bowl, and, with hardly a word, exited the house. I came across so many unsavory characters in one way or another that I became quite paranoid about meeting anyone. Several times negative spirits woke me from sleep, filling the room with frightful energy. I was terrified at these visitations. Some years later, I was told these spirits may have been people who had died, gotten lost in the etheric plan, and failed to make the transition into the light. The etheric plane, excuse me. These souls apparently saw my own astral body of flame, cracking like a bonfire and full of magnetism, as it is at this stage. So they'd come hoping I would lead them into the light. Unfortunately, the poor souls got a rude reception. I practically threw them bodily from the room. I redoubted the sincerity of my nightly prayers to the angels for protection, as otherwise I would have been too scared to go to sleep. During this time, I was also given visions of various hells, one more loathsome than the next, and of the poor souls who, by their own thinking and deeds, had trapped themselves in those awful places. Often I was given visions of this world as though seen from the other side, as if through God's eyes. In these visions I was shown how everything in the world, down to the smallest details, positive and negative, operates with absolute perfection under the direction of multidimensional intelligence so awesome that there is no way to describe it. For example, one time I went to a convenience store around midnight. While in the store, in a flash, I was shown the life history of everyone in the store, as well as how they had come to be in that place at that particular time. I understood how perfect the choices of all had been, and how even casual conversations between the patrons had, in a sense, been preordained from all eternity, and perfectly and exactly fostered God's purposes for each person there. Even this description of the vision, however, fails to its justice. I saw so much so fast of how God's supreme intelligence permeates even a perfectly mundane experience that I was thrilled, staggered, and humbled. By means of these visions, I realized how we create everything in our lives down to the smallest detail or event, and that putting aside all judgments of fault or blame, we must all take responsibility for all of our creations, whatever thought, word, deed, or omission. I was giving the general laws governing to manifestation of physical things and events out of the energies of the higher planes. On occasion, my adventures took me into what many people might call the sexual underworld, a place of unconventional sexuality, drug dealing, prostitution, heavy alcohol use, and other socially condemned practices. But I learned much in that world. I was given to see, sometimes with great exactness as from God's viewpoint, that what Jesus said about many prostitutes and sinners entering the kingdom of heaven before the righteous is as true today as it was when Jesus spoke. In the underworld, I met people who trusted life enough to allow themselves to experience the extremes of this world. These people were truly hot or truly cold, to use Jesus' words, and sometimes both. Some reminiscence of the women who anointed Jesus' feet, the woman who anointed Jesus' feet, hath learned by the very experience of such extremes to love much. True, the path of these unconventional, marginalized people is a dangerous one that often proves fatal. But, as Jesus said, this path can be, and often is, a much faster path to the kingdom than the safe, lukewarm, socially approved, avoid all risks and risk factors path many Christians follow. We can grow in awareness and love just as fast by being cold, by resolutely exploring our dark sides, as we can by being hot, resolutely exploring our light sides. Either way, as Jesus said, is preferable to a mediocrity which results in little or no growth in awareness. Exploring the dark side is not a path to be recommended, but it is a reality to keep in mind, especially in dealing with human being society as judged against. All these and lots more went on with increasing intensity for 3 years. I found it difficult to do my high-powered job, the demands of which had also increased. There things took a sharp turn for the worse. A new paranoid regime was installed at my workplace. I knew this was an outer reflection of my own paranoia now coming to the surface to be cleared. But this realization was literally comfort when the new bosses began the systematic dismantling of projects and policies I had worked on for years. Increasingly, I felt called to resign, but, worried about money, I held on. Finally, in the 4th year of this process, I did resign. No sooner had I let go of my career than I was guided to consult the books of John of the Cross and Teresa of Avila. I was still feeling guilty about sex and my own off again church attendance, and I was also feeling the terrible inner misery and wordlessness that people usually feel at this level. So I was astonished to see that what I was feeling agreed with the feelings John of the Cross describes in The Dark Night of the Soul, on no less than 38 separated points. John of the Cross goes on at great length about how wretched the person feels at this level despite whatever visions, insights, or other positive things happened. The person feels so unclean and wretched that it seems God is against them and that they are against God. Also, individuals feel so far from all favor that they think there is no one who will take pity on me, so that they cry out with Job, "Have pity on me, at least you, my friends, for the hand of the Lord has touched me." Job 19:21. I saw the essence of my state clearly, set out in mention 5 of St. Teresa's interior castle. I was overjoyed because, having let go of the mythic level sky god 12 years previously, I was often bereft, feeling that I had lost God. I still believed in God, trusted God, and prayed to God, but who or what God was, I did not know, and neither could I feel anything I could have labeled God. After reading John and Teresa, I remembered the dark night of the senses of a dozen or so years earlier, and how I relied on John for guidance. What gave me so much hope and joy was the confirmation from Teresa and John that I had not lost God, lost my way, or falling off the spiritual path, but that somehow, over the intervening 12 years, God had guided me to make my way into the dark night of the soul. I decided immediately that union with God must be once again, as it had been for so many years when I was young, my absolute number one priority. Teresa's account was especially encouraging to me, now unemployed and with no steady income, because Teresa said that after mention 5, there was only one more mention to go through before reaching the goal of union with God, mention 7. I decided to seek spiritual directions. I consulted 2 religious men, one of whom had written a book on psychology and spirituality, and the other of whom had a reputation for giving spiritual directions. But when I met with them, I was clear neither understood what I was talking about. One thought I was merely going through some kind of depression. I crossed off consulting with mental health professionals. I knew traditionally taught therapy would have been useless, and I wasn't going to allow myself to put on any drugs. I was thrown back on my own. This is to be expected in the dark night, and is specifically mentioned by Teresa. The person at this stage is in the process of claiming and owing his or her divinity. The spiritual guides will guide as will a living spiritual master, but under no circumstances is anyone, and God sees to that, going to do the work for you. Whether you sink or swim is up to you. I redoubled my efforts, often doing spiritual exercise and meditating throughout the night. I studied John and Teresa's accounts, but then I put the books aside. It was not the time for reading, but for hard work on myself. Not long afterwards, while I was attending church on Good Friday, Jesus himself appeared to me in a vision. Jesus said to me, "Do not be afraid. Go before you. I go before you. Come, follow me, and I will give you rest." These words of Jesus had the intended effect. I now knew with certainty that I was on the right track. Though if I had paid more attention than I did to the day on which the vision had occurred, which was Good Friday, I may have had an inkling of what lay ahead. How did I know that the vision was genuine? All I knew is that if a vision happens to you, you know it. There is absolute certainty conveyed with it. There are nonetheless some rules of discernment. For example, the words and images of genuine visions, as contrasted with products of the imagination, impress themselves indelibly. This is also true of genuine visions received with dreaming. Unlike ordinary dreams and products of the imagination, a true vision is never forgotten, and the truths conveyed in it are as if permanently carved into a person's mind. A true vision will also be spiritual in content and will never deviate from the core spiritual truths of religion. Soon after the vision of Jesus, I was offered an easier job that helped me financially for a while, but my inner turmoil was such that 6 months later I could not manage even that. And once again I had to resign. With no income, I could only hope the night would end soon. Then, 2 days after Christmas, while I was doing chores around the house, the heavens inside myself opened up, and a loud voice said, "You are my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." I was astonished at hearing this voice and mortified by the content of the message. Coming some 9 months after the visions of Jesus, this was my first real experience with God the Father. At least one Western Christian esoteric tradition apparently has a lot to say about the role of Jesus and other spiritual entities at specific levels of consciousness, and about specific mystical experiences, such as this one, the timing and content of which, according to that tradition, is not by chance. That tradition holds that here at the fourth or crucifixion initiation by their map, the person has finally become totally identified with Jesus as his or her own Christ self. The person now, as he or she enters the causal level of consciousness, the Christ consciousness, is given direct access on an ongoing basis to the communications of the Father. This is similar to coming into the subtle level, when the person is giving direct access to the guardian angel, their spiritual master, and, if need be, Jesus himself. This, they say, is a principal meaning of the statement attribute to Jesus, speaking as the Christ, that no one comes to the Father except through me. By the Father, that tradition means a still higher spiritual realm called the monadic plane, which seems to be their name for what I call the kingdom of heaven. That is, the level of non-dual consciousness. What seems most interesting to me is that I heard two exact words reported in the gospel as I heard by Jesus before I had even heard of the Western esoteric traditions, and before I had a clear awareness that there were such things as levels of consciousness. In other words, these things can happen whether one knows the theory behind them or not. And it happened to me, despite the fact that consciously I had never heard of such a thing happening to anyone except Jesus. The direct experience of God the Father, I now know, meant that I was close to breakthrough into Christ consciousness. But I didn't know that then. I had no idea how long this sort of thing would go on. Another 6 weeks went by. Then I had a dream. I was a passenger in a car, and all of a sudden the car drove straight up into the air at top speed. Terrified, I jumped out of the window, grabbing the top branch of a tree. Trembling, I climbed down to earth. The dream meant that my resistance to the breakthrough was almost over. The next evening there was no escape as I read a book by the American Episcopalian non-dual mystic Alan Watts. My consciousness suddenly took off and zoomed upwards into the causal plane. Breakthrough at last. During this great experience, which lasted 4 days, my life passed before my eyes in a flash, and I saw that my life up until then had been perfect, even its sins. This astonished me, though I was getting used to be astonished. In a sense, my life was over at that point, certainly my life as a mere human personality. As Gary Zukav says in his wonderful book, The Seed of the Soul, one of the reasons our souls creates a particular human personality is to heal emotional damages incurred during the earthly learning experiences of other of its created personalities. If a person works hard by spiritual practices and in everyday life by replacing fear with love, vengeance with forgiveness, jealousy with supportiveness, and etc., he or she can literally finish the assignment early. The person is then eligible to be called to the next level of consciousness and invited to take the required initiations. No one takes the spiritual initiations without such an invitation, but the invitation is always given to those who are ready. In the process, the rest of the damages are transmuted and healed, as Jesus said. If we pay a small part of the debt, God, our loving Father, cancels the rest. As though as the dark night is, therefore, it is essentially an exercise in mercy. Because of this experience and the understanding I was given by the Holy Spirit, I believe that mercy is a fitting name for this material universe, and the Divine Mother Mary, under her mythic title of Mother of Mercy, is an apt symbol for that universe. I realize that there are many Christians who would much rather not have Jesus' mother acknowledged as divine, but the Catholic Church continues to develop its Marian mythology and theology under the guidance, I believe, of Mary herself. If Mary, as many Christians' purposes, were to be acknowledged as co-redemptrix or co-redeemer, and as mediatrix of all grace, those titles, when added to those of Mother of God and Immaculate Conception, would make her divinity plain to see. It would also eliminate the divinity of the material universe for Mary, as mother or mater mythologically represents matter. Besides the live review, many other things happened to me during this event, and many spiritual insights were infused into me. It took a week to get grounded again, and during that time, I went to a college baseball game with a friend. I had a difficult, even comical time of it, because I was seeing the whole world in dazzling astral colors, more brilliant and striking than colors normally appears on Earth. But after a week or so, I was back to normal. After this experience, I thought I was home free. I knew my consciousness had definitely entered into what Christians have traditionally called the unitive way, and what I am calling in this book the causal or soul level. I figured the night was over and started making plans to resume my life, but unknown to me, all that had happened up until then was mere warm-up. It had been only the ascent to causal level and simultaneously descent into the night, not the actual dark night of the soul itself. So, this was the life experience of the author. I hope you listen to it with an open heart, open eyes and ears. May God let you see things that you never saw. When you read, when you meditate, when you walk with your friends, may God, the true God, give you the experiences that you never had. We're not talking here about the hocus pocus. I will never go in that direction. I'm talking about the spiritual guidance by the Holy Spirit. The spiritual guidance of archangels, guardian angels. The spiritual guidance of moments when you meditate. Wise people who walk with you, etc. and etc. Listen to this chapter with an open heart, not judging, but receiving. May God bless you and protect you. May He keep you from all harm. May His light shine upon you as you walk. The next chapter will be for Monday, and it will be Death on the Cross of Inner Contradictions and the Descent into Hell. I know this is a very, very in-depth study, but it's life. God bless and enjoy your weekend. This is your Pastor Yeti. Bye bye.